New Orleans, Louisiana, 1918. On a warm, early morning, a young man named Andrew Maggio was awakened by a noise coming from the wall of his apartment. Andrew listened and heard the noise again, a low, guttural moan, not from his bedroom wall, but from his brother Joseph's apartment on the other side. Andrew woke his younger brother Jake, and the pair went out the back door to investigate. The first thing they noticed was the back door to Joseph's apartment. The door was open slightly, and the lower panel was broken in. Andrew called out to Joseph and heard a sound from the bedroom, a low, agonized moan, like the one Andrew heard through his wall. The brothers rushed down the hallway and threw open the bedroom door. Inside, they found a massacre. Joseph Maggio and his wife were still in their blood-soaked bed, their bodies contorted with the agonies of death. Joseph's throat was cut, and his skull had been shattered with an axe. It was he who had made those terrible moans, and did so for several minutes before finally dying from his injuries. His wife Catherine was dead when the brothers found her. She had similar head injuries, but it was unclear if she had been killed by the axe or the straight razor, which cut so deeply she had been nearly decapitated. Joseph and Catherine Maggio were the first victims of a killer who was, in his own words, not a human being, but a demon from the hottest hell. Their deaths were the start of a year-long murder spree that would leave the city of New Orleans paralyzed with fear. Paralyzed until one hot and humid night, when they were told by the demon himself to dance to the sound of jazz music. And for fear of his axe, they did exactly that. This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans. The Maggio murders were investigated by the New Orleans Police Department, but there was little to investigate, as the killer had left behind no useful evidence. Since the Maggio's money and valuables were not stolen, the police dismissed robbery as a motive. Detectives initially suspected the murders to be a family feud turned violent, and for several days, Andrew Maggio was their primary suspect. They found it unbelievable that he had slept through the sounds of forced entry next door. The killer had also left his bloody clothes at the crime scene, which the police believed were Andrew's. And perhaps most incriminating, the razor used to cut the victims' throats belonged to a barber shop that Andrew owned. But Andrew Maggio stuck to his story and was eventually released without charges. In the early morning of June 27th, the Axeman struck again. A wagon driver made a routine delivery to a store owned by a man named Louis Bessemer. The driver found Louis and his mistress Harriet Lowe in the back of Bessemer's store, lying on the floor in a pool of their own blood, unconscious but alive. Bessemer had been struck in the temple with an axe, his mistress just above her ear. The bloody axe, which belonged to Bessemer, was found inside the store's bathroom. Robbery was once again ruled out as a possible motive. Bessemer's money was left untouched in plain sight, leading the police to suspect the attack was a crime of passion. They arrested Louis Obicon, a black man with no connection to the murders other than having been an employee at the store until a week before the attack. And while Harriet Lowe had at one point described her attacker as a black man, she was also delirious from her head trauma. Her description of the suspect was not considered credible by detectives, and Louis Obicon was eventually released without charges. Louis Bessemer became a suspect himself a month later, when his former mistress, dying from a failed surgery to repair her paralyzed face, stated that her former lover was the one who had attacked them both. Bessemer was charged with her murder and would spend the next 9 months in a prison cell before being acquitted by a jury that deliberated for only 10 minutes. He was released, and 2 detectives involved in the case were demoted for poor performance. In the early evening of August 5th, an 8-month pregnant Elmira Schneider was awakened in her bed by a dark figure towering over her. She was hit repeatedly in the face with her bedside lamp and left for dead. Elmira was discovered by her husband and rushed to the hospital, where she survived, giving birth to a healthy baby girl 2 days later. On the night of August 10th, 2 girls named Pauline and Mary Romano were awakened by the sound of a heated struggle. The commotion came from their uncle's room down the hall. and when the terrified girls went to investigate, they discovered their Uncle Joseph on the floor, bleeding from a head wound. His attacker was just fleeing the scene, and the girls were able to provide the police with a description of the suspect: a heavy-set man wearing a dark suit and a slouch hat. A bloody axe belonging to Joseph Romano was found in their backyard. A panel on the back door was broken in, and nothing had been taken from the apartment. But the lack of physical evidence brought the police investigation to a halt, and they lost their best potential witness when Joseph Romano died from his injuries 2 days later. His murder was the first to cause widespread panic. The citizens locked their doors, shuttered their windows, and loaded their firearms, ready to defend themselves against the man with the axe. Some thought the killer was not a man, but a malevolent spirit, an evil that had crawled its way up from hell to punish them for their sins. The police, for their part, now believed a serial killer was on the loose in New Orleans. A retired detective publicly speculated that the killer was a man of dual personalities, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a madman who killed with no motive other than his own lust for violence. A normal, mild-mannered citizen in the daylight hours, but at night, something else entirely. On the evening of March 10th, a grocer named Orlando Giordano heard a scream from his neighbor's apartment. He rushed to help, forcing himself through the door to find Charles Cortimiglia, his wife Rosie, and their infant daughter Mary covered in blood. Rosie stood in the kitchen doorway with a massive head wound, clutching her dead infant daughter to her breast. Her husband, who suffered similar injuries, lay unconscious on the floor. A bloody axe belonging to Charles Cortimiglia was found on the back porch, and the lower panel of the back door was broken in. Charles and Rosie were taken to the hospital, and Charles was released 2 days later. Rosie required multiple surgeries and remained in the hospital for weeks before she recovered. When Rosie regained consciousness, she told police it was her neighbor Orlando and his son Frank who had attacked them. Both men were arrested, and Orlando was sentenced to life in prison. Frank was sentenced to hang until a year later, when Rosie admitted to police that she had lied about the identities of the attackers, as revenge for a quarrel with the two men before the attack. Orlando and Frank Giordano were released, and investigators found themselves back to square one, no closer to catching the elusive killer. On March 13th, local newspapers printed an open letter to the city of New Orleans. The letter read as follows: "Esteemed mortals, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds the earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. When I see fit, I shall come and claim more victims. I alone know who they shall be. I shall leave no clue, except my bloody axe, besmeared with the blood and brains of he who I have sent below to keep me company. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think me a horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. At 2:15 earthly time next Tuesday, I will pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I make you people a proposition. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then so much the better. But one thing is certain, and that is those who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night will get the axe. As I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, it is time I leave your earthly home. I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that has ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. Signed, the Axeman." Next Tuesday night, the sounds of chirping insects and city traffic were drowned by a cacophony of jazz music as the citizens of New Orleans danced for their lives to a tune set by the Axeman. And true to his word, there were no murders that night. But the peace was not to last. On the night of August 10th, a grocer named Steve Boca awoke in his sweltering hot room to find a dark shadow standing over him. When he regained consciousness, he ran outside to locate the intruder, and only then realized that his head was split open and bleeding badly. He ran to his neighbor's home for help, and then lost consciousness. No weapon was found at the scene, but like the other attacks, nothing had been stolen, and the back door's lower panel had been broken in. Steve Boca survived the ordeal, but remembered nothing about his attacker that might have assisted police. In the early morning hours of September 13th, a 19-year-old woman named Sarah Lauman was found in her bedroom bleeding and unconscious. She had a severe head injury, as well as several broken teeth. Her valuables remained undisturbed, and a bloody axe was found on the front lawn of her apartment building. On the night of October 27th, the Axeman claimed his last victim. A woman named Carla Pepitone fell asleep in her living room and was awakened by a strange sound. She heard a commotion in the bedroom between her husband and a strange man. Carla ran inside to find the bed and walls splattered with Mike Pepitone's blood, who had been killed by several axe blows to the head. She arrived just in time to see a large man fleeing the scene, carrying a bloody axe. The large man disappeared into the night and was never seen again. To this day, the mystery of the Axeman remains unsolved. And although the city of New Orleans has changed considerably, the story of the demon who terrorized its citizens remains. His memory haunts the lamplit streets like a ghost, a reminder of darker nights past. Nights that belong to the Axeman of New Orleans.